Everyone has some form of regret when it comes to video games, whether it's that shot you missed that you just knew would win the match, whether it's that piece of loot that dropped from a monster then somebody else picked up and you never had a chance to see what it even was, but you just know it was gonna be epic and the one you really wanted. You will always regret the one that got away or that you had lag in that last match, otherwise you would have totally won. Well, this isn't about that. This is the top 7 video game regrets. Regrets that are not about your personal experience or my personal experience when it comes to playing a specific video game, but it's regrets that encompass the industry at large. Things that you kinda wish would have happened when they could have happened but then didn't happen. Things like Ron Gilbert never getting back Monkey Island so he could make Monkey Island 3, or Duke Nukem Forever not being released in the year 2000, or 2001 at least, or the fact that now every game is starting to go towards that game as a service thing, stuff like that. That being said, let's get it started with number 7, Brooklyn Stories being cancelled. You probably are not familiar with this game, I wasn't either until I saw it on the Unseen 64 YouTube channel. Brooklyn Stories is a game that was in development at a studio called Lexus Numérique. It's a French studio that made games like the Experiment 113 or something like that and the In Memoriam series. They're adventure games, not superb ones, I remember vaguely playing 1 or 2 of them, but Brooklyn Stories had potential. It was sort of an evolution, or not an evolution, but a spin-off of the idea that Warren Spector had, that of creating a city block, like just a city block, perfectly simulated. And in that city block you could tell any story you wanted. Well, his idea was a city block RPG, with actual gameplay in it. But that game is not really something you can create right now. But Brooklyn Stories had sort of the same idea, only instead of a city block it was a building. A building that would be inhabited by various people over the course of 7 decades, from the 30s to the year 2000 or so. And each character there would have their own routine, their own little story if you will, their own personal drama, their own life. It was in a way a life simulator-ish, but you were a god, so you weren't interacting with them at the personal level. No, you were raiding on top of them, watching them through the windows, through the walls, and you had the ability to interfere in their day-to-day lives. Not in the same way as The Sims, no. These characters had an actual point to their lives. They would do things that were predefined, and depending on how you interacted with them and how they interacted with each other, those things could change. For example, one of them could get robbed and murdered by one of their neighbors, but let's say if you prodded and nudged things along, eventually the person who was supposed to commit a robbery has something happen to them and never does the act. Or they do, and that triggers a different event, and well, probably the trailer on the background explains that a bit better than I can. It had time travel in it, so you're a god, you can go back in time and basically toy with these creatures endlessly until you finish the chapter and then move on to the next one. That would advance the timeline, change the characters. It sounded like an amazing concept for a game. Imagine if Jordan Mechner's The Last Express wasn't just about one character in one situation, that was about a bunch of characters in a lot of situations, or if the Telltale games had time travel in them. Actually, isn't that just Life is Strange? Imagine Life is Strange, but not exclusively what teenagers speak in it. What I'm saying is that it would have been probably a really great game, but it got canned by the publisher and the studio folded sometime after. Number 6, Silent Hills. This is probably one of the biggest regrets that everybody has about video games, if they're connected to modern video games at least. You had Silent Hills, you had a game made through a collaboration between 2 of the most creative minds out there in the movie and games industry. Hideo Kojima, who is, in a way, a bit insane, also turns out kind of difficult to work with if he doesn't like you. And you had Guillermo del Toro, and they were working together on a video game set in the Silent Hill universe, starring that guy from the Boondock Saints that wasn't young Indiana Jones. This could have gone anywhere, but the only place it went to was in the cancellation bin, in the dust bucket, because there was a bit of a spat between Kojima and Konami. The studio that was supposed to be making the game got axed, and well, Guillermo doesn't have any luck, does he? He was initially gonna make Insane with THQ back when THQ existed, but that thing folded. It was supposed to be a really neat horror game, went nowhere. Now Silent Hills went nowhere. He's somewhat tangentially involved in Death Stranding, but at least as a character or as an Easter egg. I'm not sure what his role is in the project. But in terms of making his own games, he just doesn't have any luck. And Silent Hill as well, that could have been something. Number 5, the Wing Commander MMO. Now, here's the thing, there's actually 2 Wing Commander MMOs, and I'm not talking about Star Citizen. Back when dinosaurs ruled the Earth and were routinely attacked by dinosaur hunters named Turok, Electronic Arts owned Wing Commander. It still does. It's just not doing anything with it. But the people there decided, you know what, let's make an MMO out of it. And they actually wanted to make 2 of them. Wing Commander MMO and then Privateer MMO, which was kind of confusing because they were both based on the same property. There was the Wing Commander property in which Privateer took place, but Privateer was supposed to be more open and Wing Commander was supposed to... I actually don't know anymore. It gets confusing. But the idea is that the game that was supposed to be Privateer Online or Wing Commander Online Privateer Online MMO was going to be an MMO that wasn't just about getting loot and killing players or NPCs or something like that. No. It was about interacting with people in different ways, new ways. The game was in development. It got up to a certain point. Then Electronic Arts decided, you know what, we're already making that Earth and Beyond game, which was shut down like 50 years ago or something. So they canned the project or projects. And then those people were supposed to go work on Ultima Online 2, but they didn't. Instead, they sort of not worked at Electronic Arts anymore and instead went to work at Variant Interactive, which was the studio that was making EverQuest, which later became Sony Online Entertainment. And the game they wanted to make there was still going to have the same idea of people interacting with each other in other ways than just blowing each other's heads off or looting stuff. Only now it wasn't Wing Commander anymore because Electronic Arts owned that IP, so they got the Star Wars IP instead and made Star Wars Galaxies, which, when it came out, had a fantastic idea of a system of governance between players where they could set up their own cities in the middle of the desert. It was, at its time, an innovative MMO, though with time it sort of became less of that. But if it had actually been made, like imagine without the restrictions of Star Wars, without everybody trying to grind themselves to death to become a Jedi, what it could have been. An ever-evolving, ever-expanding story of the war with the Kilrathi, where you were not necessarily on the front lines, but in that space interacting with other people, making your own stories together, and possibly getting shut down quite quickly because it was Electronic Arts. Still, the idea of the game set in the Wing Commander universe would have been something that a lot of people would have enjoyed, especially back then in the 90s when Wing Commander was still a thing and not dead as it is now. Number 4. Bethesda didn't buy Oculus. Now, if you're not aware, Oculus, the makers of the VR headset Oculus Rift that sort of started this whole craze of VR, were bought out by Facebook some time ago for the sum of $2 billion, he said while holding his pinky finger at the end of his mouth like Dr. Evil. And since then, well, it's been Facebooked, it's been walled gardened, it's been a bit more expensive than you'd think a company with the funds that Facebook has would be able to sell it for. You know, they could have underwritten the costs a bit and have it in everybody's hands so then they could corner the market and rule VR, but no, they were just in it for the money, so screw them. However, if Bethesda had gotten it, because John Carmack was pushing hard for it, come on, buy it. We can work together. I'm not even gonna steal any secrets. Promise. We're gonna be in the same family. Nobody needs to sue anybody. They could have had first-party hardware, and Bethesda is still a big supporter of VR. This would have fit so well. They're still developing for VR. There would have been more of an impetus, more of a push towards gaming, towards making it for games, towards making games for it, because it was supported by a game developer, by a game publisher, not by a corporate entity that will doom mankind to an eternity of suffering in the bowels of Hades, run by Zuckerberg. It could have been something. It could have been probably a bit more expensive. They would have needed to turn a profit. Then again, I mean, they could have just re-released Skyrim again and make up any money that would have been needed to invest in Oculus. It could have worked. I think it could have worked. Number 3, Sega giving up. There was time when consoles were not dictated by the US. They were all in Japan. Sort of a penitence, if you will, for the crimes committed by Atari. And although all the consoles came from Japan, they offered a breadth and a plethora of experiences that well, honestly, you don't really find that much today, not often. And one of the reasons for that was that Sega used to publish some really kooky ass games. You had that Seaman thing, which was a life simulator kind of thing that was really creepy. But due to diminishing sales and the drying up of the arcade market, Sega gave up on making consoles. And now it just sort of keeps making Sonic games that nobody wants or asks for. There's gonna be a Sonic movie as well, and let's hope they keep the furries at bay. But had it not given up, had it gone forward, had it continued, maybe Microsoft wouldn't have seen an opening in the market and come out with the Xbox, or maybe it would still have, and then would have had some competition. Would have had the Xbox, the GameCube, the Dreamcast 2, and the PlayStation 2 still dominating over all of them and killing everybody. But with the next generation, things could have changed. Who knows? If Sega had held in there for one more generation, what could that have looked like? What could have been? What kooky, strange games would have been created? That is the problem when imagining a fictional scenario. You're always thinking of something so nice, so marvelous, so wonderful that probably would have never actually been feasible. But still, it's nice to dream that instead of having to choose between 3 consoles, you would have had 4. Well, pardon, instead of being able to choose between 2 consoles that have basically the same games and Nintendo, you would have had a third choice. You would have had possibilities. Number 2, Origin Systems not getting a loan. Not in the sense that it was a loan, but getting a bank loan. Back in the year 1992, there was a bit of an issue with the company's financing. They were going to release some new games quite quickly, quite soon. You know, like Ultima 7, one of the best RPGs ever made in the 90s. But they were short on cash. They needed money to be able to finish the games and get them out there and publish them. However, nobody would give them a loan. No bank would, because there was a bit of a financing problem in general with the banking system back then in Texas, so they were out to dry. They were essentially dead in the water. They had gold in their boat, the shore was within sight, a giant shark was munching at their backs, and they were out of gas. So what happened? Well, they turned towards that shark and said, okay, fine, if you can get me to land, so be it. And that shark was Electronic Arts. But what if they had gotten the money they needed? They would have paid it off. I mean, they made really successful games back then. What would have happened? How would the company have evolved? Would we have still had Ultima Online? Probably yes, because they were really into that sort of thing back then, and they would have probably made it again. And it would have been theirs, not Electronic Arts'. But at the same time, that would also mean that we wouldn't have gotten the Wing Commander 3 we did we? And granted, they would have probably pushed for FMV as well, but would Origin have had Luke Skywalker money? No, I don't think so. This is a really tough situation because on the one hand, Electronic Arts absolutely destroyed the Ultima series and it destroyed Wing Commander and eventually destroyed Origin, but for a brief glimmer, it gave them all they needed. All they needed to make Ultima 7, Serpent's Isle, and Wing Commander 3. But beyond that, well, Ultima Online as well. Well, they didn't want them to make Ultima Online, but they managed to eventually. And beyond that, nothing. Beyond that, Origin is now just something you know about as the thing you don't really like to use because it's not Steam. And number 1 is Commodore screwing up. I've probably mentioned this quite a few times. Commodore had in its hands the Amiga. It was the finest computer in terms of performance, the finest home computer, the finest PC in terms of performance, capabilities, power, the sheer things it enabled the user to do. There were none in its class back then. Sure, it was expensive, yeah, no doubt, but it was still 10 years ahead of anything the competition had, and with time its price would drop if it continued to be developed and improved upon. It's a system that gave people the ability to edit media in their own house, to create media, with graphics options unseen before, audio options unheard of, an operating system that wasn't DOS-based or Mac-based. No, Mac back then was kind of okay, still is. It was the best PC ever made for its time, and it was sold by the company that probably till now sold the best-selling PC ever made, the Commodore 64, and yet with this one, they screwed it up. They did not know how to sell it. They did not know how to market it, to who to market it. Because this was a tool that everybody would want one day. And instead of communicating that, instead of driving sales, driving development, they kind of decided, you know what, yeah, let's just fire everybody in R&D and make it a game console, remove the keyboard and sell it as a game console. Yeah, that'll work, sure. That's what I did. Well, that's one of the things they did. And so the Amiga went belly up. along with Commodore, and any hope of seeing something that isn't x86 Windows based in the future as your main proper work machine. Well, yeah, now you kind of have the Macs, which came back. But from the mid-90s to the 2000s, you just didn't have any choices. But what if you did? What if Commodore stuck around? What if the Amiga evolved and continued and wasn't bullied out of competition by Microsoft and Intel? Which, you know, they would have. What could have been? What could have been? What games would we have had? Because remember that the Amiga was really pushing arcade quality games back before any other hardware in the home market could actually do. Where would we have been now in terms of video games? Would we have had the ray tracing we're getting just now a decade? Well, probably not, but still, would have gotten something like that maybe? Or more complex, more interesting games? Who knows? Who knows? So ends the top 7 video gaming regrets. If you have your own regrets, please make sure to mention them in the comments. Goodbye.